Hey everyone, thanks for listening to another episode of Human Element. Today I'm speaking with Scott Small, Director of Cyber Threat Intelligence at Tidal Cyber. Scott, thanks for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Ben. Look forward to the chat.
Yeah, so why don't you start, just kind of tell us a little bit about your journey thus far.
Yeah, for sure. So I have spent my entire career, 12, 13 years at this point, in the security and intelligence research and analysis field. Had the opportunity to do actually graduate as well as master's studies all in that field. I went to an undergrad program for intelligence studies. But that experience and my first career experiences were more in kind of traditional physical security intelligence analysis. So did intel research and analysis for a company that was looking at physical supply chain risks. So things like cargo theft and drug trafficking and terrorism. And then moved on to a couple different roles. I've kind of seen all corners of the industry at this point, definitely working for intelligence vendors as well as contractors, a little bit of time in industry itself. But basically, started my pivot into where I'm at right now, which is kind of pure cybersecurity and intelligence for cybersecurity threats. So, doing some research on threats that were kind of playing out online across the digital landscape, social media, and then shifting into what I've done for my past few roles, which is really focused on the technical aspects of cyber attacks and looking at intelligence generation around those. So, what behaviors and TTPs, especially, are attackers known to use? That's really where I've spent the last 5, 6 years of my career.
What non-technical skill would you say has had the most impact on your career?
Yeah, for sure. So I would actually say the element of kind of curiosity, honestly. And this is going into my background in intelligence studies as opposed to cybersecurity intelligence specifically. Just kind of having an innate curiosity to keep learning and keep exploring. That's going to help you out in intel in general, but especially in the cyber field. Attackers are constantly evolving and finding new ways to compromise organizations. You, as a defender and as an analyst, need to be able to have kind of an interest in learning about all these new ways that attacks are playing out so that you can also kind of brush up and learn new subjects. Honestly, on the fly, almost every single week or month, you have to learn a little bit or a lot new about something in order to kind of keep up with the pace of the attackers.
Absolutely. So you've talked about Intel and kind of making the transition over to cybersecurity. You know, generally we see that a lot out in the field, but I'm curious kind of what differences you see between the two worlds.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that having the background in kind of critical thinking and how to think about intelligence analysis problems, that has been super helpful for honestly any aspect of security that you want to focus on. And what I mean by this is a lot of my cyber security and technical knowledge and skills honestly have been self-taught. And it was a very long road to get here. The big thing that I'll shout out is there is so much sharing in the community. So if you want to learn in a deep level about any given topic, you can usually find resources. And that's what I've definitely leveraged as well. So there's a lot out there for you to grab and dig into. Now, to be able to kind of hone and perfect those skills on the fly, self taught, it takes a lot of work. You're kind of banging your head against the wall, learning how to run some new script that you've never dealt with before, but you kind of just keep working at it. But what this is all a way to say is that those technical skills actually can be picked up, whether you have formal training in it or not. The big thing, and certainly Intel skills can as well, but that's another piece that you just have to do a lot of learning and research around as well. So all aspects, there's no one golden perfect path to get into either of the aspects of this field. They can all be taught, but I know a lot of folks are intimidated by the technical aspects, but it can definitely be done even if you're doing it in your own time.
Absolutely. So you had mentioned the curiosity that seems to be kind of a universal thread across a broad spectrum of the people I know in the space. How do you go about finding that when you're looking for people or when you're getting to know new teams and new organizations? How do you figure out, all right, these are the curious ones that will latch onto this?
Well, it can definitely come up pretty naturally in conversation, but if it's not already, just hearing about someone's background. So, definitely not to say that someone who has spent all their time focusing in a single area or single topics that they're not curious, but definitely, if someone has kind of bounced around, all I'm saying is that's not necessarily a bad thing, and in a lot of ways it can bring so much value to intelligence analysis, but cybersecurity in general. Might sound a little corny to say, but it's completely true that having the different perspectives from past experiences, past careers is going to be so valuable to creating a better research or a better analytical product because you're coming at a problem from a different angle. So definitely want to, encourage the diversity of thought and perspectives for these types of challenges because again, attackers are doing the same things. They're coming at problems from all angles. They're running into barriers and need to find new ways to get into networks. And so we need kind of the same thing from the defender standpoint as well. So hearing someone has a varied background is oftentimes a good thing. And as long as they're showing that they have been successful in any of those past roles, they're going to keep learning, keep brushing up, just using that for better effect moving forward.
I've been known to say I can teach the technology. I can't teach the creativity. That's
Exactly, 100%.
so. Tell me about a mistake that has led you to personal growth.
Yeah, so early on in my career as an intelligence analyst, I've done a lot of work around kind of data science and using data to support intel conclusions. And one thing that I would encounter a lot generally is kind of reading in too much at face value into what data points might be representing. So, a common thing that we would do is look at the number of attacks that might have played out. And if you do a rank ordering of attacks impacting certain sectors, it might look like a certain sector's is just been completely compromised and attacked more than others. Well, you just need to take into account all the other nuances behind that data. So is there a reason for those numbers shaking out the way that they are? Are organizations within that certain sector just way more prevalent than the other ones? A lot of this is going to be bread and butter for folks who have been around for a long time, but you just build up those skills and you take that insight with you moving forward. So just fall into some of those pitfalls early on in your career. You learn from, what guidance you get from your mentors and then take that analysis into account in the future.
Speaking of mentors, is there any one individual who really changed the course of your career?
Yeah, or at least a couple. I'm thinking back, the first thing that comes to mind is an extracurricular club that I was part of in my university. It wasn't a requirement to be a part of this, but I had a pretty small cohort in my degree program, and it was encouraged that we participate in basically this intelligence newsletter that was on the side on top of our coursework. But I can say that I learned just as much from a handful of hours working in that club on the side as I did from, all the time I spent in my classes. And so the leaders of that club is really where I learned kind of the practical aspects of intel analysis and just how to write better and more clearly. That's where I would look at, things that they had done in the past and just simply digest some of the past reports that they had written and try to use some of the elements and the nuances that they would use in their writing in mind. So just a shout out to, some of the stuff that you can do on the side. You got to put in a little bit of extra hours on top of either whether you're working or doing your schoolwork. But man, the real world practical experience and applications of that just allowed me to elevate so much of what I was doing in terms of just regular coursework also at that time.
That's cool. What's the most rewarding aspect of your job?
Honestly, knowing that what we are working on is contributing to security and defense across the community. So, something I can elaborate on is, in intelligence analysis and doing research, I am not part of or directly embedded on the front lines of security at the companies that are our clients. So there's a little bit of a disconnect. We work on providing intelligence and guidance on how to defend your network, but then it's kind of handed over to the people who actually need to go implement those controls and those defenses. But just checking in on them, knowing and maintaining that feedback loop to know that the Intel products that we're working on are indeed valuable. And it's not always the case. We get good criticism as well, but it's all, again, just designed to help you improve your work and contribute. That's definitely rewarding and valuable for sure. And then also on a little bit more of a personal front, knowing that there's this constant kind of skills development and learning, it can be challenging in the moment because it's intimidating going into a problem or a problem space that you don't know that much about and you kind of have to learn on the fly. But when you get there and then you maybe come back to that a few months down the road and say, hey, I remember working on a problem of this type previously, you do it better and faster that time in the future. That's where it really hits that, you are progressing professionally. That's definitely exciting.
What is your definition of success?
I would say my definition of success, it's informed by, spending most of my career in kind of individual contributor roles where I have objectives or goals outlined for me and I kind of know what to be aiming for. I would say it's, meeting the intent of the goal in a timely manner, but also kind of over time, maybe being able to get ahead of some of those objectives as well. So just over time, progressing as a researcher and an analyst in my career, kind of getting ahead of some of the questions that leadership might be asking you, knowing what they're about to ask, what things that they're concerned about, and maybe being able to kind of proactively provide some of those answers. Pretty narrow view based on where I spend most of my career, but that's where I see myself being most successful and my colleagues when you can kind of predict what's coming down the pipe and still provide a good, accurate, and timely answer. That's when you're kind of really nailing it.
So we know this is generally a team sport. How do you go about building trust with your colleagues?
I would say a lot of empathy and reliability are probably two of the biggest things that stand out. Throughout the security community, you have to be able to rely and trust on your colleagues to both be there and provide support and answers in a technical perspective. And pretty much every single one of us has had those really late nights going into weekends, on weekends. And so you need to be able to kind of trust and rely on the support of your colleagues to kind of get through those moments. So understanding, where folks are coming from, what challenges they might be facing, certainly on a technical aspect, knowing all of your teammates and where they're maybe a little bit stronger, maybe a little bit weaker, and being able to kind of proactively jump in and help out and fill in some of those gaps. Close collaboration and communication kind of goes hand in hand with everything I just said as well. If you are keeping tabs on each other and able to jump in to fill those gaps when it's needed, that's going to be really important as well. And then just again, on the reliability front, providing, consistent, strong work products, that's definitely an indicator that you can be trusted, and aiming to do that and prove your trustworthiness before things get really bad so that when they do kind of reach that point, folks know that they can reach out and rely on you. And that's something you build up over time in your career as well, knowing how important that trust is going to be. Absolutely.
Is there a daily routine that you have found especially helpful?
Yeah, I would say for a lot of Intel analysis work, there's definitely an element of early bird gets the worm. I don't do anything too crazy. I'm not waking up at 3, 4, even 5 a.m. to get ahead of things. But definitely something that I learned is just so you can be as prepared as possible when the day really kind of starts to get going and when everyone logs on. Done a lot of remote work where people are joining at different times. So just being prepared for me personally, that allows me to stay calm and level headed when things inevitably get busy a little bit later on in the day, no matter what. So that is something that, reluctantly in the beginning, but I've started to incorporate and get a lot better at, is just reading up and being prepared for whatever madness you're going to face later on in the day.
Because it always comes. It's always there somewhere.
It's always there.
Do you have any tips for working in remote environments?
Yeah, for sure. Definitely not always the best at, maintaining a consistent schedule, but as much as you can kind of strive for that, it definitely helps. And even in the back of my mind, knowing that I want to be doing a little bit of, physical activity throughout the day, getting up, moving around, take a little bit of a lunch break. I try to keep some consistency there. I was fortunate, which I know, not necessarily everyone coming up in the workforce right now necessarily was, but I did work in a very traditional office environment, certainly before pandemic outbreak and before I started more consistently working from home. So I do often find myself thinking about what life used to be like and trying to recreate some of those routines, even though I am working remotely right now. That's going to be a different beast for folks who have never necessarily had that experience. But, you know, reach out, chat with your colleagues about what it used to be like back in the day, and that will at least inform some routines and good tips that you might want to pick up. So
So in those moments where things hit the fan and you find yourself getting overwhelmed, losing focus, how do you get back on track?
definitely a lot of relying on teammates truly for that. So I can think of, many late night projects. Some incident came up right as we were about to take off for work. And almost inevitably in those cases, you're going to have at least a couple people working on or at least supporting in those instances. And, you'll spend the next hour or two probably heads down, completely focused on a problem. And then you take a step back and realize, how intense the situation is. Reach out to the other folks that are hopefully supporting you in that instance, or you've got someone else on call as a backup. That definitely will help kind of reorient you, as opposed to what is probably the natural tendency to kind of spiral on your own. Most of the team has logged off for the day, and you're kind of left floating out there. Just reach out before it gets too far down that path, and it really can help bring you back, refocus you, and kind of ultimately get the task complete and let you get on with your day and your evening.
So we've got a lot to keep up with in this space. Things are changing constantly. We've already talked about there's a lot to learn and we're pretty much constantly learning. How do you balance keeping up with emerging trends while continuing to keep up with day-to-day tasks?
Yeah, I think a lot comes down to kind of having different and varied feeds of information. And it's very much a balancing act where you want to make sure you're not getting too distracted by the other stuff going on. So, what I mean by this is it's really helpful to have, you've got a few of your primary sources, for example, that you consult for most of your research and analysis work. It's really helpful to have some other different sources kind of on the side, maybe even not directly focused on the problem space that you're in, and kind of keep up with those. Now, that can be kind of a nice distraction at times. I do check a lot of social media for research and news to kind of inform my work, but it can be easy to kind of go down that rabbit hole and take you out of focus as well. So very much a balancing act, very much kind of learned over your career how to balance those things, but keeping them on the side. And then definitely, again, shouting out to having some different perspectives that can and do inform your work. So whatever you might be interested in the personal space, video games and media, it's definitely a lot of overlaps and parallels with even, cybersecurity topics for sure. And having kind of the opportunity to have some stuff that you're interested in outside of work, again, can really actually improve what you're doing in a day-to-day perspective as well.
So what are the features of an effective team that you look for and kind of hope to be a part of any team you're involved in?
Definitely communication is going to be the biggest thing. And that's hopefully kind of inherent with when we talk about teamwork, but it definitely might not necessarily always be the case. And when we are talking about remote or distributed organizations and environments, it can be really easy to fall into those traps of getting siloed and not talking with each other. It's definitely a challenge, and definitely feel for folks who are managing even hybrid or remote teams to foster that communication and camaraderie. It is more difficult for sure when you're not there in person, but having periodic check-ins and checkups, and if there are opportunities to get together in person as a group, it can definitely be helpful. But yeah, just maintaining some sort of rhythm. And it doesn't always have to be on meetings. I'm not the biggest advocate of overscheduling meetings. I like to let people have the opportunities to focus, but at the end of the day, you got to be able to speak together, speak as a group, and also speak a little bit more naturally. You don't always need to or want to be talking just about the work stuff. So having those abilities to communicate in a natural way is super important.
Do you folks have any out of work but still remote activities you do?
Yeah, so we get together. Our team, our company is growing pretty quickly now. So fortunately, these are happening a little bit more frequently. Certainly, security conferences is a big thing. We certainly benefit from being able to go and attend those. We try to speak at quite a few. You get so many great connections. Maybe the biggest for me is running into folks from previous jobs and roles that I've had. Just being able to maintain some of those touch points if you're not keeping close tabs just offline. And then do a lot of like client support interactions, which inherently brings in usually multiple members of the team. And that's really great to be able to get face to face with folks who are using our tools and technologies, learn what challenges they're facing, again, in a little bit more natural setting, but then also get some exposure to the rest of the team. So.
So when you're talking to new people, possibly even at the conferences or events, people who are coming into the field, what kind of advice do you tend to give?
Yeah, well, they're already doing this if they're at something like a security conference, but definitely the networking for sure. And I know lots of people highlight that, but at least from my own experience, it's very, very real that there are so many benefits to networking. And it doesn't always or exclusively have to be in person. There is so much sharing, especially in the InfoSec community, that many folks, myself included, have benefited from. So to the extent that you can kind of get out there and show yourself in person and get to really know folks a little bit better, that's definitely great. But engaging in online communities as well is super important. One other thing too, which is surprised and disappointed to see some folks, not many, have some of these perspectives, but I saw someone make a comment. Someone was writing a blog for the first time and working through kind of a security problem and relaying how they approached it. Someone had made a comment of, this stuff has already been heavily reported. Why are you going out there and just kind of adding to the noise? And that is just, I could not disagree more with that type of approach. There is so much benefit in so many different ways to writing out your thought process and actually documenting it. You learn so much about yourself and maybe where some of your current gaps are when you actually put words down on paper. And you don't have to necessarily go out and publish that. You're under no obligation to, but definitely give credit for folks who are willing to put that out there. Oftentimes, the goal, whether you know it or not, is to get some feedback on what you've been working on. And it may not always be positive reinforcement, but you take that, you grow, and you improve. And I've definitely seen that from all aspects in my own career. So working on something, doing a little blog to write down and document your thought processes, even if it's not, if you don't have the opportunity to talk about what you're working on for your actual professional role, but maybe stuff on the side, it's going to benefit you in so many different ways.
Well, and exposing those ideas and that thought process to the broader community, you very frequently find, maybe that person discovered a new way to think about it that other people who have been staring at it for months didn't see. It's
100%. And it is really easy to get kind of siloed into what you're doing, how you're thinking. So sharing that out there and getting the different perspectives. There's basically no other way to make that happen entirely on your own. So you need others to contribute. And that's a big way of making that happen.
I'll say I tend to find the people who get upset about posts like that are the ones who have stopped being curious and stopped having that drive, and they're just getting through the next day.
Exactly.
So speaking of new folks coming into the community, what do you do in terms of mentoring? How do you bring people along with you?
Yeah, for sure. Definitely keeping in touch with folks and try to do it, as much as I can on my own and reaching out. But I'm definitely guilty of kind of letting things fall off. What I will say is whenever someone reaches out to me that I have worked with previously, try to make basically every effort to keep in touch, have a touch point with them. If nothing else, I've had many calls where we're simply just catching up on what's been going on, but very almost equally as often, there is some end goal. Maybe it's not direct support in getting a new role. Sometimes it is, but if nothing else, just some guidance on. I've been fortunate to work in different types of roles throughout my career, all still touching on research and analysis, but doing things like customer support and customer interactions. I'll speak with a lot of folks about those elements of my career because that actually really kind of can open your horizons as well, let you kind of bounce around to a few different roles. So anyways, the takeaway is all of us have very busy schedules, definitely myself included, but trying to make time and find time to have those opportunities to catch up is really going to be beneficial. And man, I have definitely benefited from that myself. So lots of people helping me along, stepping stones throughout their career, and trying to keep in touch, so it's not just reaching out at the last moment when you do need help, but kind of staying ahead of the problem as well.
Definitely. So thinking about networking and staying in touch, do you have any process you use to either build your network or tend the network?
Yeah, I do tend to frequent quite a few of the conferences. And that's a good one because it will kind of force potential interactions. You inevitably run into people in the hallways, even if you're trying to hurry off to go attend a speaking session, you'll bump into people and have conversations that way. So that's really good. I am pretty active on social media and like LinkedIn, maybe one of the nerdiest social media networks out there because it's all focused around work. But man, a lot of us, we do love what we're working on and our careers. And that's something that's really fortunate in a lot of infosec. So anyways, seeing people popping up on the feed that you haven't talked with in a little while, I do make those attempts to reach out to folks. And definitely, if nothing else, do quite a bit of posting and sharing some of our work out there myself. And inevitably, I get people reaching out, whenever I'll post something up new. So I appreciate that because maybe I'm not always the best about doing it myself, but if someone reaches out, I'll pretty much always reply, and it's a chance to kind of catch up then.
What are your favorite conferences?
Let's see. So, over the past couple of years, I've absolutely loved the first Cyber Threat Intelligence Conference, holding that over in Germany. That has been a fantastic one, benefited so much from those talks. It's very intelligence focused, obviously, but a good balance of technically focused talks as well as more kind of career path and career journey talks as well. And that's a good one. So I'm based in the US. So despite the distance over there, you get so much variety of folks attending. So certainly folks from throughout Europe, the US, as well as the rest of the world. So I love that mixture of different types of talks and content, and then just the different types of people who attend benefit from that a lot. Definitely don't discourage folks from going to the big name events. They can definitely be a little bit overwhelming, just the size and the scale of them for sure, especially if you accidentally stumble into the vendor hall. But also, finally, big shout out to the B sides. Done a bunch of those locally and have had the opportunity to travel to some that aren't in my immediate backyard. And hit every single time, obviously, a great event. And that's a good mixture of brand new people, aspiring people, as well as seasoned folks in the field too.
Are there any books, podcasts, blogs, resources that you tend to recommend to people?
I have really noticed an uptick recently in newsletters, and I've been getting a lot of value out of those. And for me, there's even several now that are pretty much entirely focused on intelligence, a few focused on intelligence tools and technologies, investigation methods, things along those lines. So that's obviously right in my wheelhouse, but I definitely do benefit. I like to think I capture a lot of the news and the new tools that are coming out. Inevitably, tracking newsletters, someone will highlight one that I haven't yet seen, as well as then stuff that's maybe tangential to my role, but I know that it benefits. So there's been a lot recently cropping up around detection engineering, both the specific aspects of it as well as kind of methodologies. How do you build a good, robust detection? So many articles coming out, but the newsletters are good for kind of aggregating that together. So can't think of too many that I need to shout out, but if you do a quick search there, you're going to come up with a lot right now. And so that's definitely encouraging to think about.
You mentioned sharing a couple times. Definitely a big part of the community. Definitely, heavily connected to how I got here. Are there any sharing initiatives that really hit the ground and support what you're doing?
Yeah, so for me, it's been honestly pretty informal sharing that I come across. So certainly coming in and seeing new talks that are being discussed and papers that are being released, projects that are being released at conferences. But I just honestly do a lot through tracking social media. So whether I know the person who's published a new research piece or a new project themselves, or inevitably someone else in my continually growing network will reshare that. And it's honestly a really good way of kind of keeping tabs on what's going on. Certainly, if your organization is part of like an ISAC group, definitely know tons of folks who benefit from that. But it doesn't have to be through those necessarily formal methods. The kind of quasi avenue as well is some kind of maybe closed or trust based just networks, not necessarily like intel sharing specifically, even though a lot of that does happen. But in my case, there are a couple CTI focused groups where if you know someone or know someone who knows someone, you can kind of get an invite to those. And I'm definitely much more of kind of a lurker in there usually, but I benefit from that. And I do keep tabs on what everyone's kind of working on. And it inevitably will either inspire me, maybe help me in the moment, or if nothing else, I take note of stuff that definitely seems interesting or promising. And if I don't need a tool for right now in this moment, go back and check my notes in a few months and maybe can find something that'll help me out down the line.
Awesome. So I know those invite groups and the trust groups can be tricky when you're working with new folks. Any tips on how they can find their way there?
Honestly, at least keep in mind all the time about your network and seeking to expand it. You don't want to artificially inflate that. And I know it's kind of a fine line to draw, but if you do have even a small or a decently sized network, I think usually within maybe two steps, you can reach out to someone who does have those connections to maybe help you out. And, you know, I mentioned not trying to artificially inflate that. I think people do see and recognize when you're being earnest about the effort and maybe in cases where you might not be. So maybe just kind of keep that in mind as well. But if you have a genuine interest in joining one of these more closed networks, I think, you hopefully have a couple more trusted folks in your network, and then they certainly do as well. And usually in my experience, I haven't had too much trouble breaking into some of those spaces that I wasn't part of yet, just with knowing your network, the size of it, and who you can most trust within it.
Are you watching any developing trends in the space that are going to change the way we work?
Yeah, so the one that's unavoidable at this point in time is the impact of AI on the landscape. And it comes on both sides, both how attackers are leveraging AI as well as how it can help defenders and intel analysts. So, there is so much hype in this space, but it is really, in my mind, kind of unavoidable that we start to wrap our heads around the problem for sure. So, it is a fact that adversaries are leveraging and seeking to leverage AI to support their operations. We are seeing improvements where they are really kind of embedding AI as part of their workflows. Right now, we see it probably more as lowering the barrier to entry into traditional types of cyber attack activity, but AI truly helping others who might not be proficient in that starting to have kind of more of a leg up. And honestly, that could increase the scale of attacks and threats that we're facing. I see so much benefit in AI's applications in the right ways and in targeted ways for defenders. So I myself have greatly benefited from, we look at a lot of unstructured, publicly available threat reporting out there. AI can and absolutely does help process through some of that reports, especially if you kind of do a good job of checking its results and maybe fine tuning some of the prompting. So if it's hallucinating or coming up with something you weren't expecting, make a tweak to how you're kind of feeding the AI system. But I can speak uncategorically, it has helped my day-to-day workflow and definitely saved me some time in a lot of spaces. The other kind of major trend that I'm keeping track of, definitely don't have a great solution for it myself, but is this give and take of cybercrime actors who are incentivized to talk about and to hype up what they're doing and the attacks that they're carrying out. So we are fortunately seeing in some cases, especially for a lot of ransomware groups, we are seeing more law enforcement action being carried out successfully to at least temporarily disrupt some of these groups. It is very likely that certain groups will go a little bit further underground so that they aren't as much on law enforcement's radar. And that certainly will make them a little bit harder to keep track of. If they're moving off of channels that aren't easily monitored, certainly aren't open source or even on visible dark web spaces, that's going to make our jobs harder as intel analysts. But it is at least a little bit of a relief. There's always going to be a give and take. They don't want to go completely dark. They want to make sure that people know who they are and that they can be reached. So there's opportunities to try to keep tabs on them. And if you're not an expert in following those leads and those tunnels deep down in the dark web, again, maintain the network. There are lots of specialists in those areas, and reach out, ping them for maybe their thoughts and their support, so you don't completely lose track of maybe certain groups that are a priority to you.
Yeah, it's very interesting to watch the dynamic of, okay, I'm a criminal, I probably ought to keep my mouth shut, and at the same time, oh, I want customers to buy my toolkit or buy my service, whatever I'm selling. I've got to advertise that too. It's an interesting dance they do there.
I can only imagine. I mean, it's a nice relief, but the amount of anxiety that must be on their minds all the time as I definitely wouldn't have the backbone to do that day in and day out, be constantly worrying, but apparently some people do. But yeah, it's a fine line that they have to tread. But fortunately, we are seeing some success in some areas more recently too.
Unfortunately, that's all the time we've got for today. Before we wrap up, people want to follow along with your work. Where's the best place for them to go?
Yeah, for sure. So again, thanks so much for the opportunity to be on the podcast today. I'd recommend, follow myself and my company. We do a lot of sharing on both fronts. So tidalcyber.com. We have a great blog out there. Do a decent amount of technical reporting on kind of threat-led defense, as we call it. We're pretty active on LinkedIn. And then for myself, that's where I do most of my publishing and writing on LinkedIn. I'm happy to connect with anyone who's been listening, and looking forward to staying in touch.
All right. Thanks for the great conversation, and thanks for taking the time.
Yeah, thanks, Ben.